welcome to another episode of MathisonTalks, where we discuss tech and everything in between. My name is Mike Vega, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mariano. Hello, Mariano.
Hi, Mike. Nice to join you.
Thank you. We would like to hear your comments, as we're always checking our Twitter and LinkedIn at MathisonTalks. This episode has been sponsored by Mathison Projects, Inc., a web development company. We're actually holding a contest right now for free web development. So if you're interested, check out our socials for Mathison Projects, Inc. Today, we will be talking about the nuances of old businesses and modernizing those nuances with 21st century technology. Mark Cameron is the CEO of W3 Digital, a company that identifies as Business Technologist, where its main focus is to maximize the value of technology. Welcome, Mark, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm really excited to be having this discussion today. And thanks a lot for inviting me on.
Thank you. So I just want to start off by asking, how did you get into the tech space and what drove you to create W3 Digital?
Look, my story is a weird and twisty road, to be honest. I started my career in the advertising marketing space in New Zealand, which is where I'm originally from. That was in the 90s. So, the internet was really just starting to become a thing. Google didn't exist, social media didn't exist. As I was, developing my career in that space, I could see where technology was going to be taking the customer space, I suppose. So I got really interested in that. I joined one of the largest digital agencies in New Zealand at that time. And by about 2001, beginning of 2001, had decided I needed to, head overseas. I looked at coming over to Australia for a short period of time, and I had actually lined up a job in New York. Was heading over there. Unfortunately, September 11 happened, so then that job ceased to exist. So I was based in Melbourne at that point, which is where I am now, Melbourne, Australia, and I started becoming a kind of like a digital strategist. And it was that point, we're talking early 2000s, a digital strategy was kind of whatever I decided it was going to be that week. There was no real, there was no real format. It was pretty, it was cowboy days. It was the .com boom kind of side of things.
The Wild West, as I like to call it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Very Wild West.
Yeah.
I joined the company I'm with now in 2003 as it was starting up. And it was more in the kind of marketing branding space at that point. Ended up taking the business over in 2007 and completely restructuring it, heading it down more of a digital agency path for a while, and then becoming increasingly focused on digital strategy, technology strategy, advisory. And over the last few years, we've really sort of shifted to becoming very much focused on, I suppose, really like a management consultancy in the digital transformation space. So we spent a lot of time working with boards and executive leaders, helping them understand where technology is going, how that applies to their competitive strategy, their business strategy, and then thinking through everything that's going to be required to help them get there. So there's a lot to do with change management, culture, organizational strategy, as well as the technology piece.
And so what I'm gathering here is you completely pretty much took over, you revamped it. So how did you get to the point where you describe yourself now, or the company rather describes itself now as being Business Technologists? Like, can you give our audience an idea what that means?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so in that journey, as I was working on building the business up and shifting it and having to navigate through the GFC and a whole range of different things that happened at the same time, I spent a lot of time writing and sort of blogging, essentially, talking about where technology was going. Ended up picked up by some of Australia's biggest business magazines, and my sort of passion was really always thinking about the strategy. Where where the company is investing in technology, how's it going to impact their customer experience, their employee experience? How's it going to impact their competitive strategy? How's it going to impact their business efficiency? So really that idea of that technology is starting, but as it's evolving and as it's rapidly evolving, it's becoming less and less a supporting function and actually more a competitive decision that businesses are having to make. So that's really where the focus that we've been taking over the last few years, which is, as I said, like very much more on that consulting side. Yes, we help people think through automation. We might help people think through specific pieces of technology, or help them think through how they might move from one ERP system or a CRM system, for example. But at its core, we're working with the organization to think about their longer term competitive strategy, which is why we say business technologists, because we're saying that the technology choices they make now are going to impact their business for a very long time. And they need to think about that very carefully.
And I think it's really important to have something like you, Mark, handling this strategy, because you have been here before Web 1, Web 2, and you have saw all the changes along the way these years. So if you were here before Google, if you were here before internet was launched, or the main internet, or the big internet explosion, .com and everything, it is great for you, for your customers to have something like you helping out.
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's one of that perspective is one of the perspectives I bring to the discussion with our customers really early on, helping them think through the big economic cycles that we've been through over the last couple of decades, for example. One of the things I like to say a lot was that when the GFC hit, 2007, 2008, the biggest, that was at the beginning of the explosion of social media. Search had really just started to explode in the way that it, in kind of what we understand sort of Google is now and so on. And it was really starting to have an impact on the way that businesses engage with their customers. So when the GFC hit, the biggest problem that most businesses, large and small, had at that point in time was, how do I find, engage, and retain a customer? And that gave birth, that sort of drove a lot of investment into things like marketing automation, drove a lot of investment into developing skills around digital marketing techniques, and then the other elements that went around that. So things like customer-centered strategy as a whole, customer innovation, agile methodologies, design thinking, those kinds of activities, which were much more focused around how do we get feedback from customers very quickly and build that into our strategic cycles. Sometimes that is technology-based and sometimes it wasn't. What's interesting now, following COVID and the economic cycle that we're in and entering right now, is that how do I find, engage, and retain a customer is a little bit more well understood. That space is a bit more mature. But I think the biggest challenges that businesses are facing now is, how do I find, engage, and retain talent? How do I get more revenue from the customers I already have? And what are the big emerging technologies that are going to change the shape of my business, my sector, and the way that we generate revenue? And the other point is that, I suppose, when the GFC happened, there was really, one or two technologies that were maturing, as I said, like social media and other elements, big data analytics and a few other those areas were maturing quite quickly. This time around, we have multiple categories of technologies that are all maturing. So, everything from artificial intelligence to, we've got, the rollout of 5G, we've got, Internet of Things, we've got, whole ranges of technologies that are all maturing at once. Any one of them can have a massive impact on whole sectors of the economy, and together they will, they'll have huge impacts. So, the outcome from this economic cycle is going to be a significantly greater shift in the world economy than we saw following the GFC.
To clarify, GFC being global financial crisis?
That's right. Yeah, the global financial crisis in 2007, 2008.
I have an interesting point, and because I attended a marketing seminar by a top Google executive. She still works there, and she had an interesting piece of information, and it was those companies that invested money during the GFC actually outperformed those that didn't, because a lot of companies wanted to, be or hold cash, right? They didn't want to invest. They didn't want to, expand or try to further reach for customers. But some insights, some data points that she actually showed, and was super interesting, was those that invested during these times, during the times where there's unrest, recession, you name it, they actually outperformed and outlived and outgrew those companies that didn't.
Yeah, and that's been the case throughout history. I mean, Coca-Cola is the big, huge business it is now because they decided to invest in during the Great Depression, where all the rest of their competition were basically hunkering down. I think the kind of term that I love to refer to there is the best time to win a race is when nobody else is running.
Good point. Exactly. Okay.
I think absolutely right.
So moving along, I wanted to kind of ask how does digital transformation reduce risk?
So digital transformation is kind of a big term. And so to understand how it reduces risk, you kind of really need to first of all think about what digital transformation is. And sometimes it's mislabeled, I think. So often people think about a digital project as a digital transformation. Like, we're going to put in a new ERP system or a CRM system or a big, piece of technology inside an organization, and that's going to transform the organization. The truth is, transformation happens at the human level, not the technology level. So transformation is usually, you can invest in technology, but it's when the culture starts to shift. So, when we're speaking with our customers, we say, look, a real digital transformation is, yes, you can use a big investment in technology as a catalyst for it, but it's when your culture of the organization is better set up to compete in a world that's being shaped and driven by technology. And that's at a cultural level. That's where every single person in the organization is seeing the opportunities that technology can bring their role, their organization, the way that they deal with customers, and you can find new competitive advantage in that space. How it reduces risk is exactly that. So it reduces risk. So a good digital transformation process, which takes into account the cultural shift required to get there, reduces risk, because a lot of technology projects that are labeled digital transformation projects, of those, about 80% of them fail. And the reason for that is because they are viewed purely as technology projects, as opposed to cultural shifts and the opportunity to retrain, redesign processes, restructure the organization. So they reduce, a good, well-designed digital transformation project reduces risk because it takes into account everything required to get the best possible outcome.
Yes, I want to say that it's easy to implement a new tool, like when PMP or Agile methodology starts, and a lot of companies adopt that, but the resistance to change is wider at a human level. So it is important to do the digital transformation there, as you said, Mark.
That's right. And I think, after doing this work for years and years and years and years, I can tell you that a lot of digital projects are set up because the business fears what's happening in the market, and that starting point can create that change, that resistance to change. What they're saying is we're going to run away from something scary rather than run towards something exciting. And I think, the best digital transformation, the best technology projects, the best business transformation projects are less focused on, how do we save the organization, and much more, what is the new exciting future that we're taking the organization into? As soon as you start to shape that up, change management and cultural change is really hard. No matter what you do, it's always going to be hard. But the starting point of actually saying, let's head towards an exciting future, makes that process much easier.
I wanted to ask you, because I've heard of this word digitization, right? So I want to ask you, what's the difference between digitization as opposed to digital transformation of a company?
Well, so my perspective on that, now, there'll be lots of different people who have different view of that, but my perspective of that is the difference, as I said, a digital transformation, a real digital transformation, is taking into account the human aspect. So taking into account the change management required, the process redesign, maybe the organizational redesign, thinking about the operating model shift that could be required. Whereas digitization is essentially saying, we're going to do the same stuff we've always done, but we're going to put it into technology. So it's where they, map out all your current processes, and then those processes are just put into technology without thinking, hang on, could we redesign all of this to actually make it better, more efficient, help us generate new revenue, change the way that we interact with customers, rather than just doing what we've always done, but a bit faster and cheaper, and maybe a bit more accurate. So I think that's the difference. Digitization is just, as I said, just taking an old process and putting it into technology and hoping that works. Digital transformation is much more strategic, much more holistically looking at how does the business evolve and generate new revenue, generate new value by leveraging technology.
To help me better understand digitization versus business transformation, I want to kind of highlight some work that you've done at W3 Digital, because as I understand, and I used to be an EMT, so I'm licensed EMT, and I remember one of the biggest headaches that I heard from the majority of those in emergency service is the constant bottlenecks of data input. So can you describe how you implemented strategies for its digital transformation, and how it's different than digitization?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, like the process we're going through. So the work I think you're referring to there is the work with the Ambulance Victoria, which is the state ambulance body that we did that we worked with in Australia, and we do that, a lot of the work in partnership with Australia's largest telco. So we do we do a lot of work, on behalf of them and in partnership with them. And what we're doing there is sort of when a customer is going to that telco saying, hey, we want to implement a bunch of new technology. We've got some issues around how data is captured and processed, or we've got some issues around user experience, for example. Quite often the customer is saying to the telco, well, can you help us implement this technology? And we get brought in to to take a step back and say, well, hang on, why is that the problem? And we spend a lot of time mapping out. So in that case, mapping out the paramedic experience. So from beginning to end, understanding every single step of what was happening in the paramedic's life cycle, all the different tools they were using, where the data flows were happening, where there were bottlenecks, and then starting to map out strategies around how that could evolve in terms of using different devices. So things like Apple Watch, or looking at where sort of tablets could be better leveraged than they currently were, where automation was going to start to play a role. So how data could get processed between systems by using robotic process automation, for example. and then also just where the human aspects were involved. So were there new roles that are going to be required to make that area more efficient? Were there different KPIs or so on that could be implemented in the organization to help enable the change that was going to be required. So again, that much more holistic view rather than just trying to get into the technical architecture. We're starting to think about how does the business work, and how does implementing technology, a new technology or a new suite of technologies, shift the way that organization works and move it towards where they want to be, as opposed to where they are.
I have a lot of our audience are actually those in college, and they like to kind of find out where their skill set can be placed, right? And there's various business and digital transformation maybe they would have never even thought to look at, right, as an industry. For our audience, can you kind of give us an idea of what you seek? Or do you seek like programmers, I'm assuming, right? Cloud specialists, I'm assuming. Can you give us more insight? What do you seek?
Yeah, I mean, there's an element of technology to what we do. So yes, there's some cloud specialists, some people with enterprise architecture background, or solution architecture background, but the vast majority of our people have a much more diverse background. So some might have come from management consulting, business consulting. They might have been inside large enterprises working in innovation space before, or they might have come from, as I said, I mean, myself, I came from a more of a marketing background. So the thing about the digital transformation is, again, because it's holistic, you need to have lots of different lenses. So you need to be able to think about how to develop a business case. Strong sort of business background is important. We need to be able to think about how it's going to impact brand. We need to think about how it's going to impact culture. So change management, workforce planning is important. So again, it's much more of the business consulting side of it with people who have deep understanding of how technology works and where it is applied into the business context.
Thank you for that. And that's going to be useful for a lot of our audience as well. I want to shift gears because I've heard so much about the metaverse. So
yeah,
right. So can you describe what are the benefits maybe and business opportunities of the metaverse? Or if there isn't, what's your take on it?
My take is I'm a little bit skeptical.
All right.
I think the metaverse is an inevitability probably in the long run. But I think the current champion of the metaverse, being Meta and Facebook. I mean, the business model is essentially going to be advertising driven.
Right.
In their version of the metaverse. And I think that's going to produce a suite of economic incentives that probably don't produce the real key opportunities that that kind of technology could produce. So, AR, VR, those kinds of technologies, incredibly, incredibly powerful. They can be used for amazing sort of outcomes for businesses, but I think them with just a purely advertising driven model behind them are potentially very risky.
Yes, this might sound funny, but don't you feel that people is scared or I don't know, surprised about the metaverse because all the movies or of the futuristic deployments, like the one with Bruce Willis and all the situations. Yeah, it's so funny because nobody knows exactly what they are talking about, but they are scared. It's like the digital transformation. So the people is scared. They don't know what they are talking about, but they are scared.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think I look at it in terms of economic incentives and what behaviours will be driven off the back of it. And as we see, when it was just Facebook, as Facebook evolved, the economic incentives around how that was policed and how it is being policed shifted behaviors and has changed, political discourse across the globe, all sorts of unintended consequences of that business model, essentially. I think for a lot of those big technology firms like Meta and Google and so on, their business model is essentially to pull together a suite of technology and extract as much margin out of that suite of technology before regulation catches up. Facebook, Meta is exactly in that spot now. Regulation is catching up with them very quickly. Their core business model probably is going to become at risk over the long run. They need to think of something new, so they're investing in the metaverse. I would say that while it's it's big and interesting right now, probably what's going to become, if I was to take a bet, I would say that something around a digital assistant that has AR, so augmented reality kind of interface, maybe with VR interface, will be where things become more interesting in the longer run. So if you look at what Apple's been doing, for example, for the last almost 10 years, but definitely sort of 7 years, they've been talking about how privacy is their big focus, how that your data is going to be safe with them. Even if the FBI comes after it, they're not going to be able to get access to it. And they have been investing really, really heavily in what you would call kind of a digital assistant, so like Siri, but the amount of investment they've been putting into it, and if you look at kind of the areas that businesses they've been buying, you kind of say it doesn't match what's out in the market. So what I would say is that and it's very clear that that the Metas of the world and the Apples of the world are very much more in competitive tension than they've ever been. So if I was to take a bet, I would say that, sometime in the next few years, Apple's going to do what they always do, which is go, hang on, we've just released something that changed the market. They're going to release probably in like an advanced version of Siri or as some kind of digital assistant. The way that you make it more effective for you is to give it access to a whole bunch of your data. So Apple becomes the bank of your data, essentially. By the way, that's going to cost you an extra, $5 or $10 a month for them to look after and manage all that. And the way you interface that digital assistant will be through AR, goggles, and you might go into the VR occasionally. But fundamentally, Apple have come out and said, why create another universe when we've got so much work to do with our own universe here? And I think that's, that how does technology overlay with who we are and what we do, as opposed to creating a space where we can completely escape from the world that we're in, I think is philosophically a different perspective, and probably the one that would potentially, in my view anyway, the one that would win out in the long run. But, hey, I'm just making a guess.
Right. I feel like it's just Meta freaking out that that Facebook is going on that downward slope, and they need to pivot to something new and shiny, Yeah,
I agree. Absolutely. And as I said, things are becoming tougher and tougher and tougher from them on every angle. That's Apple's making their life harder. Governments are making their life harder. The public's perception of the brand is making their life harder. They're having to try and find something new. But they might be biting off a bit more than they can chew.
Well, we'll end it on that note. Mark, I want to thank you so much for joining us. And for those interested, where can people contact you and learn more about your company?
I can learn more about my company at w3.digital. And you can you can look me up on Twitter at Mark R. Cameron. So at Mark R. Cameron and or on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mark, and providing this really wonderful insight. If you have any feedback or suggestions or want to comment on the subject, be sure to check out our Twitter at MathisonTalks. And also, we have a new Discord. So if you'd like to join the discussion, you can find it at MathisonTalks.com/Discord. Don't forget to share, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.